address your questions. Thank you so much.
All right. So the next speakers are from I see Paul and Andre. I see you both are online and you both are co-hosts, so you should be able to share your slides. So Paul and Andre are from the srsRAN project and will give us an introduction on the project and on what are the goals and the timelines for future development of srsRAN, with a particular attention to the open source 5G RAN. So Paul, the floor is yours. Thanks again for the presentation, and yeah, go ahead. I'm not sure we can hear you if you're speaking.
Hi, Michaela. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, now I can.
Oh, perfect. Sorry about that. And can you see my slides?
Yes.
Super. Okay, so thanks very much for the invitation to talk about srsRAN today. I'm here with my colleague, Andre Pushman. Andre is the VP of Engineering of SRS. I'll be presenting, but Andre may jump in on some more technical details. So the presentation I'm going to give really addresses the question of what is srsRAN, a little bit about the company behind it, the sort of work we do, and then looking at the specific applications that we've released recently and that we intend to release over the coming months. So most people who have heard of SRS and srsRAN know of us through our open source project, which was formerly known as srsLTE. srsLTE provided an end-to-end software solution, open source, for a 4G network. So we include a full stack application for UE, for eNodeB, and a lightweight EPC application. This is software written in C and C++, targeting x86 and ARM processors, deployable and runnable on the laptop or desktop in front of you, using commercial off-the-shelf RF front ends. Earlier this year, we updated the name of srsLTE to srsRAN. And with that change, our focus shifted slightly. So for 4G, we provided a lightweight core network solution. As we move into 5G support, we decided to move away from the core and focus on the RAN itself, the UE and the eNodeB or gNodeB. And that's what we've been mainly focusing on this year, and which we'll be continuing to focus on in the coming months. So what are the objectives of the project? What is it we're trying to achieve? And we define our mission as providing the most trusted open source software for mobile wireless networks. And what I mean by that when I say most trusted, it's twofold. We intend to be stable and reliable, real world deployable, but also transparent and auditable from the fact that we're open source. So users have complete visibility into the software that they're running on their systems. We've been open source from the very beginning, since the very first applications that we released. We use the AGPL v3 license, a widely used, widely recognized open source license, recognized by the OSI and FSF. And we focus on mobile wireless networks. So full RAN and UE software stacks. We're not focusing on the network core. We're not focusing on orchestration or mobile edge. We're focusing on the RAN and UE stacks themselves. So how does one get srsRAN? Well, everything is publicly available on our GitHub site with a link here. On this right now, you'll find the source code repository all in a single repository called srsRAN, along with our documentation, which is also open source, built and hosted on Read the Docs. So how does one use it? As I said, it's as simple as using a laptop and a commercial off-the-shelf SDR. So all of the software is written in portable C and C++ for x86 and ARM, and it will run on everything from your high-end server to a Raspberry Pi 4. We support a range of different RF interfaces, ranging from commercial radio heads all the way down to your $20 SDR. We have detailed application notes and documentation, user manuals on docs.srsRAN.com. And certainly that's a very good starting point for anybody who's starting to use our software. So the key question, is it any good? Well, I want to give a couple of examples of some commercial engagements that we've been involved in recently. As I said in our mission statement, one of our key objectives is to write software which isn't just usable for R&D and for demonstrations and for prototypes, but is also real-world deployable. So the first example is in the field of air-to-ground networks. These are very challenging deployment scenarios, and we've been involved in, I think, 3 separate projects so far for air-to-ground. Just recently, one of our commercial partners called Smart Sky Networks launched their commercial air-to-ground network for business jets in the continental US, and we're preparing a press release which will be going out tomorrow morning on this engagement. With Smart Sky Networks, we provided the eNode B Layer 2 and Layer 3 for their network deployment. For this, we ported the software onto a specific hardware platform that was being used by our partners. And that solution is being used to run the entire network with the long ranges and high speeds associated with air-to-ground deployment. One of the biggest benefits of using SRS software for this project was the fact that our commercial partners were able to take our stacks and customize them themselves for the particular deployment scenario that they were interested in. And that speaks to the open source nature, first and foremost, but also to the way in which we develop our code. So it's very much designed from the outset to be accessible, to be readable, to be understood, and to be modified and customized by users and by partners. A second example that I want to highlight is some work that we've carried out with a US company called AST. AST are developing a direct to mobile low Earth orbit solution for 4G and for 5G. And we've been working with AST for about 3 years now, from the very concept stage where we helped them to build their prototype modified eNode Bs that were capable of closing the link from low Earth orbit direct to mobile handset. So that's been a really interesting engagement, and we continue to partner with them. In addition to our commercial engagements, we have a very wide range of R&D users. And on our project website, we track all of the main academic publications that are published by srsRAN users. To date, we've tracked over 250 of these academic publications, and they really highlight the breadth of research that's being carried out with our software. One of the aspects which we hadn't predicted, and which is something we're very proud of, is the extent to which our software is used within the mobile wireless security community. And we've received very good feedback from this community at how it's enabled them to achieve real-world results within that context. One of the ways we've seen this is in the GSMA Mobile Security Hall of Fame. The Mobile Security Hall of Fame lists coordinated vulnerability disclosures that researchers have made, highlighting vulnerabilities within 3GPP standards. This is a slightly old snapshot of CVDs that have been disclosed. These are the CVDs that were disclosed based on work using SRS software, using srsRAN. So as you can see, the majority of CVDs have been identified and disclosed through work based on SRS software. So a little bit about the company behind srsRAN, so who maintains the project. Software Radio Systems, we're a private company. We were founded in 2012. We have office locations in Ireland and Spain. We serve a global customer base. We have 22 full-time employees scattered around the EU. We've grown quite a bit over the last 2 years with many of our employees working fully remotely. We're 100% SDR engineering focused, and we've grown organically since 2012, so we don't have any external investors. So how is it funded? Well, our general approach is to dual license our software. So all of the software which we release under open source under AGPL v3 is also available under commercial source code licenses. And so quite a lot of our business comes from users who are using our open source solutions to prototype and to validate the software for their needs. At the point of productization or deployment of a service, they will quite often approach us for a commercial license in order to do so, and also in order to gain support and sometimes custom development on top of those open source solutions. In addition to licensing, we partake in publicly funded projects. We've worked with the European Space Agency. We currently are involved in a number of Horizon 2020 projects in the EU. We've been funded in the past by NIST under the Public Safety Communications Research Group. And most recently, we're funded by DARPA through a project to bring forward our 5G development. So taking a look at our roadmap, this year has primarily seen us release 5G non-standalone solutions, which build on top of our existing 4G solutions. Back in April of this year, we released the non-standalone mode UE. In late October, we released the non-standalone mode G Node B. Our approach in general is to have 2 releases each year, one in April and one October. And this is the pattern that we intend to use going forward. Right now, having released the non-standalone mode solutions, we're moving quickly towards standalone versions of the same. We're running development of the UE and the G Node B in parallel right now, and we're targeting our next April release for the initial versions of those. So in the lab right now, we're carrying out tests using our standalone G Node B stack against commercial off-the-shelf UEs, and equally, we're testing our initial standalone UE against third-party RAN solutions. So diving into some of the specific applications that we released this year, first I'd like to look at the non-standalone mode UE. And this is taken from an application note on our documentation website, which gives a step-by-step guide into how to test and implement the non-standalone mode UE on commercial off-the-shelf hardware. So non-standalone mode involves adding a secondary carrier, a secondary 5G carrier to an existing 4G infrastructure for high rate throughput. The typical deployment scenario used for testing the non-standalone mode UE is to use a dual channel front end, such as the USRP X310 or X300. In this example, we show how the non-standalone mode UE can be tested against a third-party RAN solution, in this case, the Marisoft call box, where the 4G carrier runs over one channel for control signaling, and the secondary carrier is enabled on the second channel of the X300 for high rate data throughput. This is a console trace from a test using the non-standalone mode UE against the call box. Stepping through, you can see the identification of the cell, random access on the 4G carrier, network attach, followed by secondary carrier activation. And in the console trace, you can see independent metrics for both the LTE and NR carriers. The solution also includes an optional graphical interface, and this is simply a graphical output of the constellation plots of the 4G PDSCH and the 5G PDSCH symbols. So moving on to the non-standalone mode eNode B. Again, we have a dedicated application note on the documentation website, stepping through how a non-standalone eNode B can be configured and run on off-the-shelf hardware, and then test it against a commercial off-the-shelf UE. And this is the console trace for that UE running on a standard PC with an X300 front end, with a commercial off-the-shelf handset. Another aspect I want to highlight is the ability to test our solutions without radio hardware. So within our stacks, the approach that we've used to support multiple RF front ends is to define a common API below the physical layer and then to implement different radio drivers. In addition to support for physical hardware, we've added in a virtual radio interface. This essentially allows you to transport baseband INQ samples back and forth over Ethernet using the ZMQ library. This is a really, really useful tool for testing an end-to-end solution. And again, on the documentation website, we have a dedicated application note illustrating how this virtual radio approach can be used to test the complete end-to-end system for non-standalone 5G. And this is a very, very useful tool for gaining an insight into the mechanics of non-standalone mode operation and how secondary carrier activation works specifically. Another tool that I want to highlight was released along with our non-standalone mode G-Node B in late October, and this is a tool called CoreScope. So already in October, we had implemented quite a few pieces required for standalone mode 5G. And we were using these in such a way that we thought would be useful to open source. So CoreScope combines G-Node B and UE components without any radio transmission. So it essentially takes the upper layers of the UE and the upper layers of the G-Node B for standalone mode and bridges the two so that you have a single application that's capable of attaching to a third-party 5G core and exercising that core as if it was a UE attaching through a real G-Node B. This is hosted on a separate repository under our srsRAN account on GitHub. And all of the documentation for this can be found within the wiki on that repository. So digging a little bit more deeply into how this operates, if we look at the standard control plane for standalone 5G, here what we're doing is we're taking out the in this diagram, you can see the UE on the left. You can see the G-Node B attaching over standard end-to-end interface to the AMF. And here, what we're doing is we're bridging under the UE NAS and putting in a common RRC bridge multiplex to allow that control plane traffic to go directly over NJP to the AMF over that end-to-end interface. In addition, so this isn't just for a single UE, this approach supports multiple UEs, and there's a well-defined API for adding UEs to the application and to exercise the core network. Equally, for the user plane, we have a bridge under the SDAP layer. And instead of including the full radio stacks underneath that layer, we've added in a PDCP bridge and multiplexer. And this again allows that application traffic coming through the SDAP to be transported directly over GTPU to the UPF over the standard N3 interface. And this is a really useful tool for exercising your 5G core network. But also for us, it's a really useful tool for validating the interoperability of our UE NAS layer and our GTPU and NJP layers on the G-Node B. I mentioned the API that's used to add UEs to the application and to exercise the 5G core. This API is defined in OpenAPI, and we've provided a Swagger UE in order to make it easier for people to exercise this API, both through a web interface and also through a programmable API. So it makes it very easy to write a Python wrapper, for example, that will automatically generate a certain number of UEs and control their behavior in order to exercise the core network in a particular way. And this really is a stepping stone towards our full 5G standalone applications, which will be coming early next year. So looking at the road ahead, as I said, We're very focused on standalone mode implementations of both the UE and the G-Node-B right now. The previous presenter highlighted the ORAN Alliance architecture, and that's something that we're embracing for our standalone G-Node-B implementation. This is a kind of a high-level view of the architecture we're taking for our G-Node-B. Within this diagram, the items highlighted in blue are within our scope, and then the external interfaces are third-party solutions that we'll be compatible with. So in addition to splitting DU and CU and splitting the CU between control plane and user plane, we're also integrating FAPI interface. This starts to become very interesting when you look at existing solutions for ODU low, such as the FlexRAN solution from Intel. And this is by including this FAPI interface, it means that these third-party solutions should be plug and playable with our overall architecture, which I think is going to be really interesting moving forward. Here I'm simply highlighting the individual layers that sit within each of these components. As you can see at the bottom of the diagram, we do intend to support both split 8 and split 7.2x for fronthaul. So split 8 will ensure support, continuing support for off-the-shelf SDR front ends, such as the USRP from National Instruments, whereas split 7.2x expands the range of radios that are available for testing. And we do intend to have out-of-the-box compatibility with one or more off-the-shelf ORAN RUs when we release this G-Node-B. And that concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to take any questions.
All right. Thank you very much. Again, a very interesting project. And I think also the thing that you mentioned on the CDs being found by using the open source implementation, I think it's also something very, very interesting. So I think there's some questions that are coming in. I also have a couple of questions. So the first question is, in the case of the deployment in Smart Sky, just curious of how to handle that level of Doppler effect.
Yeah, very good question. So as you've rightly recognized, in an air-to-ground deployment, Doppler starts to become a major problem. It's handled in different ways. So as I said, we've been involved in, I think, 3 projects in total so far for air-to-ground. And each project has handled it in a slightly different way. In the case of Smart Sky themselves took responsibility for customizing our stacks in order to handle that Doppler. But we have implemented solutions ourselves based on more accurate frequency offset compensation, detection and compensation. And we've built those into our solutions for commercial partners.
Thank you. There's another question that looks a little bit to the 5G part. So does srsRAN support low band only, or will it plan, or does it support also mid band and millimeter wave? If so, what kind of accelerators does it support for example, for the 5-layer processing?
Very good question. So our immediate focus is on low and mid band, FR1. We do have FR2 in our roadmap, but it's slightly further out. So in our releases next year, we don't expect to support FR2 at that point. When it comes to acceleration, that's a really good question. So within our team, we do have an FPGA team that's focusing on the use of FPGAs for acceleration of 5-layer functionality, especially FEC. And so we're very interested in supporting the ORAN acceleration abstraction layer in order to integrate look-aside accelerators in our G-Node-B stack, for example. Within the company, we have also done a lot of work on the UE side of the application space, where we've taken our full UE stack and ported it onto FPGA-based solutions. And for that, we focused on Xilinx UltraScale Plus MP socks and RF sock. So we took the full 4G UE stack, for example, and ported it onto MP sock starting by putting everything on the ARM cores on the MPSoC, and then gradually taking pieces of the filer DSP chain and moving them into the FPGA. And that's been very successful. But that's the general approach we've been taking. I think it is going to become very interesting as new hardware solutions for ORAN start to become available. And I see a huge amount of potential for example, ARM-based processor platforms with discrete accelerators for FEC. So that's something we're paying close attention to, and we're very keen to support.
And is this part of the next code drop, the next code release, or something that you are looking for more for the future?
So the existing FPGA work we've done to date is not open source,
Okay.
partly because we do rely on third-party IP cores for FEC, both for 4G, Viterbi, and Turbo, and also for 5G, Polar and LDPC. And so that limits the ability to open source those in particular. As we move into next year and focus on standalone mode, the availability of the acceleration abstraction layer within the ORAN architecture gives us a standard API that we can add support for. And then that allows third-party solutions to be combined with our open source solutions. And I think that's going to be very interesting.
Yep, definitely. All right, we have a couple of more questions. Adam is saying, thank you for the informative talk. How large of a connectivity range can one achieve using the type of COTS equipment NSA setup described on the srsRAN site? Can you speak to link performance with this setup in outdoor or non-interference-free environments?
Sure. Yeah, very good question. The kind of lab targeted radio front-end solutions that we highlight in our documentation really is designed for indoor use, and it's designed for up to a couple of 100 meters maximum. However, we do have partners who are taking two different approaches, either taking that same hardware and adding RF front ends in front of those devices with PAs and LNAs and filters in order to extend the range which you can achieve. The second approach, which many of our commercial partners have been taking, is to replace those front ends with commercial outdoor radio solutions. The approach of supporting ORAN split 7.2x front ends, I think, is really going to accelerate that and is really going to enable that. So no longer will we be restricted to USRPs and Lime SDRs and Blade RFs. We will now be able to buy off-the-shelf commercial grade radio heads for ORAN architecture and plug and play them. So I think that's going to be very interesting.
Yeah, so it's basically mostly a matter of hardware rather than specifically software support.
Exactly.
Yeah. Then a question that asked for a clarification on the relationship with FlexRAN. So is srsRAN L1 based on Intel's FlexRAN or something else?
No, it's completely standalone. So it's the RL1 is code that we have developed entirely ourselves. So it's not related to FlexRAN in any way. And as such, it's not restricted to one particular hardware platform. So the same L1 runs on Intel hardware, AMD hardware, ARM hardware across the board.
And it's also open source.
Exactly.
Then another question is asking to compare the strengths of srsRAN versus other similar open source software projects, for example, OAI.
Yeah, very, very good question. One that I get asked quite a lot. I think OAI does an excellent job of providing early reference implementations of recently standardized features. And it's an excellent R&D platform because of that. Our aims are slightly different. We don't aim to very quickly support all of the latest features that come out of the standards bodies. Our focus is very much on achieving stability and the ability to be deployed in the real world in the field and to do so reliably. So we probably move slower than OAI when it comes to support for new features, but because of that, we aim to have more robustness and more stability and more focus on those real-world deployments.
All right, thanks. And for whoever is interested, we'll have a session on a similar session to the one that Paul just had on OAI tomorrow. Then we have another question. Will the SRS 5G SA genome B include the E2 agents, or will they be released in a separate release?
That is something that we're looking at. And so we have a number of srsRAN users have already included E2 agents in forks of the repository. So I know that researchers from the University of Utah have already implemented E2 agents within our eNode B stack in a fork of our repository. And so that is something that we do intend to include in our 5G standalone gNode B. I'm not certain that we will have that in the first release, but it is certainly something we're looking at for later releases.
Yeah, that's something very interesting. And we also played a little bit with E2 and SRS, and we'll talk about this in probably half an hour.
Very good. And also actually the Horizon 2020 projects that we're currently involved in are focusing very much on that E2 interface and the ability to exercise our stacks through that interface. So it is, we are committed to adding support for that within the next year or so.
That's very interesting. Then we have a couple more questions. I think, can you please share more details about milestones in the roadmap for srsRAN 5G standalone, such as support, for example, for massive MIMO?
Sure, massive MIMO is I would see that as an advanced feature. So we certainly won't have support for massive MIMO in the first releases. Our roadmaps tend to be influenced very much by our commercial partners, and they're very much in flux at the moment, as there's a huge amount of interest in this space. When we will add support for features like massive MIMO really depends on the priorities of our commercial partners and of the community at large. So for me, I don't think massive MIMO is a very near-term priority. But it is something that we do hope to support in the midterm.
Then last question, and again, thanks for sticking around to answer to the questions. So, is there any, from the implementation perspective, is there any interaction between the implementation of RRC and STAP protocols?
I'm not sure I understand the question there.
Rafik, I don't know if you want to elaborate a little bit more on your question. We can also unmute you in case.
Maybe I can jump in there.
Yeah.
Can you guys hear me? This is Andre from SRS.
Yep.
Thanks, Andre.
So like the answer is a little bit like the answer to the previous question. So in the first drop of the gNode B, the SDAP protocol or the SDAP layer will be pretty much a path through to PTCP. So there won't be any uplink or downlink mapping of QoS flows and all those QoS and all those bells and whistles that the RRC can configure. But certainly this is something that I mean the layer is there and that you can extend upon, and then we will see how the roadmap, and as Paul said, the customers, and this will be driven by those stakeholders. But that's certainly something that is there, and even external contributors can look at and implement if they wish so.
All right, thank you very much. And I think these are all the questions that we had. So I would like to thank you again for stopping by and giving this very interesting talk. It has allowed us to understand better about one of the key open source projects in the 5G ecosystem. So thanks again. And